Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jerry Snyder, and I'm going to be one of your presenters today. Joining us a little bit later is Nate Quilter, will be our second presenter. Both of us, of course, are speaking on behalf of COPEC today, and that's the nonprofit organization that started about 12 years ago. And COPEC stands for Central Ohio Professional Education Council. And you might be a little familiar when you registered for the program today. You probably saw a little bit of information on COPEC. We invite you to go into the website at any time. It's copeceducation.org, and you'll be exposed to a lot of good information and many other programs that we're involved with. So Nate and I are one of about 25 separate members of COPEC, each kind of representing a different discipline. And we, of course, are the financial piece of that organization, and very proud to do so. Like all of the other speakers, we volunteer our time to do essentially two things: give programs such as we're doing today, as well as most of these speakers will give a no-cost consultation following any of the programs. You know, there's only so much we can accomplish in a short amount of time. Many of the issues that we're going to be talking about affect you individually. So we do want to provide that opportunity. It's under the same terms, which is there's no sales attempt, no obligation to continue to work with any of the speakers, and of course, no obligation of any sort. So no sales or no attempts to promote our companies at all. Now, I will mention a little bit background so that you know who's speaking to you today. Nate and I are members of Retirement Strategies, and that is a local registered investment advisor located here in Dublin. And we have been in our present organization for about 20 years. We have 4 certified financial planners, and if we added up all the experience, it would far exceed 70 years. So just wanted to let you know that so you know who's speaking to you. And I will mention that we have dealt with Ohio State and many of the Ohio State employees over many, many years. And of course, those that are connected with state teachers and OPRS, Public Employees Retirement System. And so we do think we have a pretty good handle on the benefits of OSU and the programs offered by the state pension plans. Now, having said that, I want to make it clear that this is no substitute for dealing with your organizations directly. They have many fine counselors that are very knowledgeable to help you through some of the retirement decisions as well. So I will mention too that we have tried to get you copies of our handout covering today's PowerPoint in advance. And I think we also have that in the chat area for those that you didn't miss that or would like to print out the handouts, which really kind of match our slides and hopefully helps you make notes as well. I am going to ask one important favor of you, if you will, and that would be to take a very short survey following the program. It literally takes, I think, 20 or 30 seconds, but it really does help us to report back to our nonprofit as to how many lives we've approached. So you can say as much or little as you want. Now that survey will also allow you to ask additional questions in case we don't get to those. We do invite your questions, and you can put those in the chat box. We may continue through the program and then try to address those more fully towards the end so we can keep a timely presentation. So yes, you can use that to give us feedback. How did you benefit by the program? Did you enjoy it? Do you have any improvements that you might pass along to us? If you have questions or you need additional information, you can tell us via that survey. And then finally, if you would like to have that individual consultation, please let us know as well. So without further ado, the program generally lasts a little over an hour, maybe about an hour and 15 minutes. So we'll try to keep to that. And then we will try to keep some time for questions at the end. So let me proceed here. And so we have talked about that survey. We appreciate that much. Our objectives today really is to educate you, and that's what COPEC's really about. Now you'll hear some things that you probably already know, but we want to kind of refresh your thinking about those and kind of bring that to the top of your mind. But another thing that we are hoping to bring is where the state pensions can't, is really talking about strategies and options that you have and kind of the pros and cons of those. You know, when you make many of these retirement decisions, they're going to be irrevocable in nature. And you know what that means. You can't maybe modify it or change it once you make those changes. So in particular, Nate, a little bit later, is going to be talking about this in the form of a process that we recommend most individuals go through, even though you're not close to retirement, but particularly if you are getting close to that retirement date. And this program allows you, and it looks at many, many different variables, and it allows you to test out some of your decisions before you have to make them. And so you can look at the pros and cons, you can look at the impact, long range, how is it going to affect your retirement accounts? Is it going to create enough income for you? And those are the questions that this process is designed to help you with. And Nate will really be filling us in on that. So not really sure why you're attending, but we appreciate it. You might want to confirm the knowledge you already have. Hopefully, maybe there's some specific issues you want more information, and I hope we can fulfill that today. And then others of you might be saying, well, hey, it's really time for me to pull everything together, take a long-range view of how things are likely to play out, and really look at everything comprehensively. So we'll be talking about that as well. So I've listed some of the specific issues that I'm going to be talking about, and I hope they address some of your needs in terms of pensions, distribution options, get a lot of questions on Social Security, and of course, the importance of healthcare, Medicare, and long-term care. And like I said before, some of you have these broader questions. When can I be financially independent? When can I really tell my employer that, hey, I'm ready to leave and be comfortable and have the peace of mind that things are going to work out for you? Questions like your portfolio. Should I make changes in that? I'm getting a little older and I'm getting close to retirement. Should I adjust my portfolio in terms of the makeup of maybe stocks and bonds and those kind of things? What is the impact if I stay one more year? Gosh, I'm stressed, I'm ready to leave, but 1 year extra might make a difference in your plan. On the other hand, maybe you can be very comfortable to really leave at any time because you know that you will have the financial independence. And a lot of people want to look at part-time work as well. So we can look at that within the planning process. So again, I'm going to go through a little bit more on the income sources that you have and some of the decisions that those involve. Obviously, the traditional pension plan, depending on when you were hired, you may have had an opportunity to get involved in either what we call the member-directed or the combined plan. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of those different plans or the different characteristics. Or are you involved with the ARP, the Alternative Retirement Plan? And if you have one or the other, do you have some options to make a change down the road if you desire to, or if it was in your best interest? And the supplemental retirement plans, a great alternative to additional investing for retirement. And like I said, we'll touch on the Social Security as well. Well, I'm sure I don't have to tell you about all the changes that have taken place in the last 5 years. And this has taken place with state teachers or the OPERS type plans. Retirement eligibility, the benefit formula is changing, final average salary, the COLA, and things of that nature. Those changes were designed to make the retirement plans healthier and so that they can meet their long-range commitments in paying out pension benefits. So although they may have been a little painful, it was to the good of making these plans healthier. So some of the ones in particular, final average salary, I think now it's affecting most people. You may have been in a class because of your longevity to have those grandfathered, but essentially the plans have been changing from 3 years to a 5-year final average salary. So again, if you've gotten incremental raises, then this might function to lower your pension benefit by a certain amount. Again, it may affect some people and it may not really make that much difference for others. So the cost of living, as you well know, state teachers have suspended that. We hope that they can bring that back on as the plan gets healthier. And of course, OPERS is still, they've kind of capped their cost of living. I believe it's 3% to a cap of tied into the CPI, however. So whatever the CPI is, that's what your COLA would be with a cap of 3%. But even there, upon retiring initially, there may be a delay in implementing that COLA. And contributions, particularly state teachers people, they've had a higher and higher obligation to put more in as far as the employee contribution. So these are the changes, and again, I'm sure you're well aware of those, but you need to maybe revisit those as well. Well, what I'd like to do at this point is to just refresh our thinking on the characteristics of the two main types of pension plans, being the defined benefit and then the defined contribution type plans, which would encompass the AARP plans or the member directed if you are involved in those. So again, they work entirely different in terms of the defined benefit plan, your traditional plan from the state pensions, is a promise to pay you really for the rest of your life, a benefit that you can't outlive. Again, you may choose to share that with a survivor or a significant other, spouse, but regardless, when the payments start and when you stop, the payments stop. And your benefit, of course, is based on the age when you started, your final average salary, and the number of service credits you have. And again, the general trend has been to require more service credits and a higher age to get unreduced benefits, or even reduced benefits, requiring higher age and more service years. And you know, a year or two can make a big difference, so you want to be very careful on that. But with the defined benefit, the administration has responsibility for the investment responsibility. And so you don't get to choose the investments or the allocation. You're depending on the state pension to do that. Now, traditionally, there's no lump sum. So when you leave at retirement, you generally can't take your pool of money with you, your funds with you. You pretty much are required to take a monthly benefit. Now, there is an exception. We'll talk about that. The partial lump sum option, affectionately known as the PLOP, is available too. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But I want to reinforce that the payments end at your death, or if you have a survivor, you end a survivor's death. And once you start those, you can't stop those, you can't change them. And so there's some lack of flexibility there as well. Now, on your defined contributions, it's kind of the exact opposite. There is no promise to pay you for the rest of your life. Your benefit is determined by how much you put in, how much your employer puts in, and the growth of that account. But then you're going to decide when to take money out with some limitations and how much you want to take out. So there's, I guess, more flexibility with that. But you also take on the responsibility of how those funds are invested. Now, you may have limited choices, but you do have some choices. So you have some responsibility there. Now, you may deal with an advisor to help you, but basically it's your responsibility. Now, when you leave, and we'll get into this a little bit further later, but you can stay with the custodian that you're with and continue to have them administer your plan. But again, you have the choice as to when to take things out. Now, you can also, with some restrictions, move to a different custodian if you choose in lump sum. You don't want to take possession or it be taxed. And then, so you do have ownership of that. And also, there is kind of a legacy feature at this point because you have more control and you can actually pass funds on to, children or second generation if you don't go all the way through those assets. So I'm going to talk a little bit more then about distribution options of the defined benefit or the traditional kind of plan. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the AARP choices. Now, obviously, the highest benefit you as the member can achieve is your single life option. It's going to be based on just your life and your age and the other factors I mentioned final average salary and length of service. And that's going to dictate what your pension benefit is. And again, it's going to be payable for life. When you decease, it stops. And then, yes, you can name a joint survivor. Typically, that would be a significant other or a spouse. And you have a lot of choice as to how much you might want to share in the benefit with them. The default option is 50%, and a law kind of legislates that, but you can actually have them participate in higher than 50%. And I just gave a few examples here. It could be 80%. Some people fine tune it. It could be 66%. Or you can share the same benefit you receive at 100%. Realizing that when you pick a survivor, regardless of what amount, your benefit as the member is going to be reduced because the pension has to provide for more than one person. So you're going to take a reduction as long as you live in your benefit. I'm going to give an example here in a little bit about that to make that maybe a little bit more clear in your mind. A couple things that tend to get overlooked that we want to bring to your attention, and they're very good planning tools to consider, and that is what we call period certain. These are additional provisions that you can add to your basic decision of your distribution amount, and also the reversion option. Well, what's the period certain? Wouldn't it be a shame, and it has been a shame in certain instances, you've worked your entire life to build up these service credits and to build up a nice pension benefit, but as I mentioned, it stops when you stop. And so if you were to decease, we hope this never happens, but it has. If you decease early on in your retirement, you may forfeit a lot of money which can't be passed on. So they do have what's called a period certain. And you can add this either to the single life or to the joint survivor life so that it guarantees that you're going to be paid out a certain period of time. So if you add, let's say, a 10-year period certain, you retire, and the third year into your retirement, you run into serious health problems and let's say decease. Well, if you have a 10-year period certain, they're going to continue those payments to whom you choose for the rest of that 10-year period. So in my example, 7 more years. Does this cost money? Yes, it's the form of a little added insurance. But depending on your health, maybe it could be a viable decision that you want to add. You are going to pay for it in the form of a reduction of your pension amount. Again, we can show examples of this, but reversion option, very, very important. So let's say you do pick a survivor. So while you're alive as the member, you're getting a benefit, but in case you would decease ahead of the survivor is going to also get a continued benefit. It might be at a reduction, but nevertheless, they're going to keep that benefit going. Well, you've taken that reduction. Now, what happens if the survivor would predecease you as the full member? Well, if you have a reversion option, like the name implies, your benefit will be reverted back up to the full single life benefit that you would have initially. So this is great and something that should be considered. One nice thing about OPERS is you don't have to elect this. They've built that in. It's automatic. With state teachers, you do need to elect that. The good news is it's very low cost, we feel, to add that. So we rarely don't recommend adding it. You may only have a reduction of about 1% or 2% to add, to reduce your benefit to add that reversion option. I mentioned the PLOP. You can take out in lump sum from your defined benefit anywhere from 6 months to 36 months out in lump sum. So I'm going to talk to you about that in a few minutes as to why you might want to consider that and when maybe that doesn't make sense. But let's look at an example here. And this is an example of a person. They happen to be state teachers, but the same thing applies if they were with OPERS. The same concept applies. And let me go through this example a little bit with you. In this case, they had 30 years of service with state teachers. They had a final average salary of $75,000. They did elect that reversion option. It didn't cost them much to do so. So that member's individual payment would be $4,125 every month as long as they live. And so, but again, if they decease, that's going to stop. Now, by the way, I think all the pensions are the same on this. If you decease before getting your own contributions back, you will at least get, or your survivor will get, at least the amount that you put in. But you may be giving up a lot of the growth and or the employer's contribution. Well, in this example, let's say they wanted to provide 50% of the single life benefit to a survivor. Well, the first thing that happens, as you can see, is that the member benefit is reduced. It's a little over $300. And so they're giving that up for their whole life to provide 50% for their survivor. So that if the member died, the survivor would get one half of the $38.19, or about $1,900 a month. So the member takes a reduction, and then if it's 50%, the surviving partner would get half of that amount. And the so on and so forth with the 75%, that's about a $440 reduction to provide 75% to the surviving spouse. So if the member died ahead, the $3,681 would be reduced to about $2,800 for the survivor. And if they picked 100%, and a lot of people pick this out just very hurriedly without knowing the long-range impacts. That's why we really want you to do some long-term projections to see what your survivor needs are, and then what your needs are while you're alive as well. But the 100% would pay both the same amount, but the member is reducing their benefit by about $570. So, by the way, and this is one thing we look at the client's insurance. How much insurance do they have? Rather than giving up such great reductions while the member is alive, particularly if they're in good health and they are planning and likely to live out a long time, maybe there's a more efficient way. And sometimes if they have life insurance, it might even prove beneficial to buy some additional life insurance and then keep more of the full payment for the member, knowing that, yes, they want to take care of that survivor, but they might do so by having insurance death benefit paid to them. And you want to make sure it's a good insurance company and that they're going to be around to pay that benefit. But we call that kind of pension maximization. So it is an option that we look at for our clients as well. Let me then take this same example, and we're going to look at a PLOP, that same example, looking at a PLOP where the client is taking the maximum PLOP. In this case, they could take out $148,000. Now, again, remembering that you, the employee is putting a contribution in, your employer is putting their contribution in, it's growing, you've got this pool of money. Guess what? You don't own that, you own a benefit off that, but they are allowing to take out anywhere from this 6 months to 36 months. If they took the full PLOP out, it's $148,000. That represents, by the way, about 25% of that total pool. And so what I'm showing you here is the reduction of the monthly benefit that the member would have if they took that full PLOP. And so reduced accordingly. And then the reductions would be further for their survivor if the member dies. So in the interest of time, I want to move on, but I do want to mention that some of the reasons why you might want to consider that PLOP, some of the reasons why you might not want to. And if the client is in a pretty positive situation at retirement, maybe they have a spouse that's had a good retirement or a good employment as well. So they're finding, hey, we don't need all of that money right away. We can afford to defer that a little bit more later. And remembering that once you start that defined benefit pension, you can't change it, you can't alter it, can't start and stop it. So that's a very, very important decision to make up front. And so some people that want to defer that further, and a lot of decision that would drive that is your tax situation, your long-term tax situation. I'm going to hammer this a little bit more. Another important reason to kind of project out and see what your tax brackets are likely to be in the future as well, and how might they change. but it may help to defer some of that later, which you can do with the PLOP. And then actually, then it becomes in your control and you can take money out when you need it, as you need it, again, with some limitations that we'll mention here in a minute. But then you get ownership of that. But yes, you're going to take on the responsibility as to how that's invested. And as long as that PLOP is sent to another custodian directly, then it's not taxed to you, and you can continue to defer it. So that's a very careful part of the transfer process. And again, I like the legacy aspect of this for some of the clients, because if they don't go all the way through that, they can pass that on to a next generation, unlike those defined benefit fixed payments. What about paying off bills? We get asked a lot about mortgages, and I think maybe Nate will mention this a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, if people have a high credit card debt or maybe even a high mortgage, then yes, maybe they do want to take out some of that PLOP, put it in their bank account, and get some of these higher debts paid off. So that is certainly another option that we would want to look at. Now, I don't want to slight the ARP people, but it's a little bit more simple because you don't have all these defined benefit choices, but it's nevertheless very important. And basically, again, your account balance is going to be what money went in from you and the employer and how it grew. But again, you have the responsibility and the opportunity to invest those funds. Again, the choices that you have at the university may be a little restricted in the company you need to pick. You have to pick a approved company, and the choices that you get. Once you leave or separate from the university for retirement purposes normally, then you could pick another custodian that maybe their fees are less, or maybe they give you more options. So those are choices that you'll have. And we would talk about rolling it over to what we call an IRA. And so now, yes, you can cash totally out, but you're going to face total taxes at that point. So, you know, and we get some folks that kind of have remorse as they wrap up their career. They said, gosh, I wish I would have been in that defined benefit plan because it pays out a guaranteed income for the rest of my life. Yes, but maybe it's not too late for some of those people too. So another option is to maybe convert that back to an annuity, and that could be offered by your current ARP employer or a custodian, or maybe it behooves you to move those funds to a custodian that may give you that option. So that's kind of a fallback position as well. Now, I want to talk about supplemental retirement plans for a few minutes. And gosh, here's something that's really, really changed, as you probably might have a feel for. Starting the first of this year, the university has taken real significant steps in changing the opportunity for you to get involved in these plans. Well, first off, I want to remind you that you as a member and an employer of a high estate kind of fit into two categories, as you may well remember. You are considered working for a nonprofit, but at the same time, you're considered working for a state employment, a state governmental unit. And so therefore, you actually can participate in either one or both of these programs. And so you can really do both at the same time if you have a capacity to do that. So 403 is because OSU is tax exempt nonprofit. 457 is because they're a state governmental employee. And what has taken place, of course, is prior to the end of this past year, there was many companies that the OSU had approved. 8 or 9 companies in both of these type programs. And so it was confusing to, what company do you pick? And then all of them had their own platforms for how you can invest within the company. And frankly, I think there was a lack of transparency on maybe a lot of the fees. In some cases, there was too many maybe choices. In other cases, there was too few. So they wanted to get a little bit more simplification if possible. Having said that, we think it's still pretty confusing to work through. And I might mention, COPEC is actually doing separate workshops just for this issue. We're not going to have time to talk about it. It's hugely important. These are great opportunities for you. But they have reduced the number of companies and they've reduced a lot of the expense structures. So do pay attention to that, and do realize it's just an excellent supplemental way, reducing your salary. And so you get that tax benefit at the front end, getting the funds tax deferred until you're ready to take them out. And again, guys, you can do so much in these plans, or you can do as little as you want. You can put out a very small amount each pay period, or you can really start maxing these out. In each of the plans, you can really totally put about $26,000 in, particularly if you're over 50, 19,500 if you're under 50. And again, you may not have the capacity to do all that, but once you retire, you lose your capacity to take part in these programs. So we highly encourage it. Another thing we see is people, when they retire, have unused vacation or sick pay time. And the university ordinarily would pay that out and have that taxable all in the year it's paid out. And some of those can be a pretty good sum of money, where you can open up, or maybe you have opened up already, one of these accounts to receive that money and get it tax deferred going forward. So that's just another strategy that we look at with our clients. And so again, while you're at the university, of course, you need to use one of their approved companies. There's a few insurance companies. There's one that I know of, which is a non-insurance company, more investment oriented. So, look at the cost difference, look at your investment options, and look at the distribution plans that they offer. May lead you to one or the other. Again, I'd love to have you join us. I know we're having a program March 19th on these type of plans, but we also put an announcement in the on-campus, almost weekly announcements of programs, especially for this decision. I've listed here just other retirement plans that either you or a spouse, maybe you had prior employment. We get a lot of questions on Roth. So we like to look at whether a Roth program fits into your plan. And I saw also a real quick reminder on distribution rules, because you want to be aware of these and not violate them. But IRAs in particular have that 59.5 rule. Those were intended for retirement planning and retirement income. So the rules say that if you try to access those, since they're tax deferred, prior to 59.5, not only will you be taxed with distributions, but also penalized. And so be aware of that. They have changed. We've appreciated the change in required minimum distributions, which states that if you reach this age and you haven't taken any funds out of your tax deferred retirement accounts, then you must start taking at least a minimum amount out. The government wants to start to get some money taxed on those. And so if you have any questions on that, we can get into that in more detail, but they have lengthened it from 70.5 to actual age 72. So for them, that gave them an extra a year or maybe a little longer, depending on when your birthday was, to get an additional deferral. We hear some talk that they may even extend that age, and we would encourage that. But again, generally after age 59.5, you can access those without penalty. I might mention here too, another advantage of the 403B and 457 is accessing the accounts prior to these ages 59.5. They have some flexible rules that, particularly if you are retiring early and you want to defer, or you must defer some of these other retirement accounts, or you're aging into your state pension, but you need some income, well, consider these 403B and 457 as a source for early retirees. Okay, Social Security, we get a lot of questions, and I want to get through this pretty quickly, so Nate has adequate time. So the questions, of course, do I qualify? How big will my benefit be? When is my maximum time to start the benefits? And what are the reductions, and how are the benefits taxed? Well, a quick 101 on this subject. I think most of you might know, but first of all, do you qualify? And to qualify, the first issue is, do you have 40 credits? Now, this has changed a little bit over the years, but a credit is equal to $1,470 of earnings under a Social Security employer. And you get one credit for every $1,470 that you earn. Well, you can only earn 4 credits in any one calendar year. So whenever, if this happened in the past, or you have a part-time job now under Social Security, as soon as you earn $5,880, it changes a little bit every year, then you've hit your 4 credits and you can't have any more credits within that year. Now, certainly you can earn more money under Social Security, which will lead to a higher benefit. But in terms of this initial eligibility, you'll only get 4 credits. So essentially, we're talking about the equivalent of 10 years, but they really go under the credit eligibility. Now, you may know too that Social Security at the time of calculating your benefit is going to look at your high 35 years under Social Security employment. If you haven't had that many, they're going to take as many years as you had in calculating your benefit. But then secondly, and importantly, they're going to look at each year, did you have substantial earnings as they have defined it within that year, which is really going to affect your benefit and your calculation. I hate to give this away, but when I had my first job, I was paid $6,800. That's back in the very late 60s. Well, by the way, that was considered substantial earnings at that time. And so, now I think substantial earnings for this current year is really in excess of $26,000 under Social Security employment. So you do have to look at that. Now, another thing we highly recommend if you haven't is to go on socialsecurity.gov and start an account, open up an account with them. And, you're going to do the passwords and the security challenge questions and things like that. But once you do that, then you don't have to rely on them mailing statements, which they've been a little erratic about sending those out. And you can look at each of your earnings each and every year and do a double check to the best of your recollection to make sure those are accurate. But you're going to then count up, and if you need help with that, we're available to help or deal with an advisor maybe to help you on that. But then you can start to get a handle on the number of substantial earnings years that you have. And then, of course, the age that you start is going to determine your benefit as well. Well, again, I think most of you know you can start a benefit at age 62, but each of us has our own what we call full retirement age, the age that you would get a full benefit from Social Security. Now, FRA, full retirement age, has become very, very important to know because it dictates a lot of things, which we will talk about. But you can start at 62. You get more of a full retirement benefit at age full retirement. Generally, for most, I think in the audience, it's going to be 66 to 67 maybe. But then you can actually defer the benefit beyond your full retirement age. And by the way, for each year beyond your full retirement age, you get about an 8% higher benefit. And so it could be like 32% higher from your full retirement age. So it is something to look at, in particular if you would be sharing a benefit with your spouse. On the other hand, if you start at 62 from your full retirement age, that could be as much as 25 to 30 to I think even 32% lower. So be aware of that. The calculators that will look at Social Security, even the one on the Social Security website, it can do an accurate job, but it's just looking at one issue, your Social Security benefit. But when we look at your other sources of income, maybe deferring, needing to take out distributions from your other retirement accounts till they mature at a higher rate, then it's not always the best answer as to what some of these calculators are telling us. So again, in favor of doing a more full comprehensive look at things. Now, so here's that chart that tells you when your full retirement age is. Very, very important. And then the issue comes up, well, are they going to reduce my benefit if I do continue to work when I start Social Security? And this chart reminds us that yes, if you start a Social Security benefit before your full retirement age, then depending on how much you're making from your employment, your benefit could be reduced. Your Social Security benefit could be reduced. And so it tells us here that this current year, $18,960. If you're receiving Social Security before that full retirement age, then they're going to look at your earnings. And for every $2 over that figure, you're going to pay $1 in Social Security. The middle bracket there, the middle box, is telling us that they recognize that some of us are going to work mid-year, maybe till June or something. So we're going to have more substantial earnings from our employer before we start mid-year with our Social Security. So there is more liberal reduction in that benefit. They're going to allow you to make $50,000 over $50,000 this year. And then they're only going to reduce Social Security by $1 for every $3 over that in the very first year, mid-year, where you're taking Social Security. Then after that, they're going to apply that $2 for $1. So I'm going to move ahead a little bit, because another thing to be aware of, and it's not great news, but it is the realistic application of taxes and how do they tax Social Security. And unfortunately, at least at the federal state level, they're going to tax Social Security and looking at all other earnings that you have. So let's say you're waiting till retirement to start Social Security. You have your other incomes coming in, investment incomes, you have your retirement plan distributions. But yes, they're also going to look at your distributions from Social Security. And depending on whether you file singly or jointly, and depending on whether you're single or head of household, will dictate how much of the Social Security they're going to kind of bring back in, either 50% of that amount paid to you or 85% based on total adjusted earnings, will dictate how much is going to be brought back in for taxation. And finally, and again, I want you to realize I'm the messenger here, so it can be a contested issue, I'm afraid, but you've probably heard of this, and it's not particularly great news for those that are eligible for Social Security, but the windfall elimination, you've heard, and also the government offset. Now, again, briefly, the windfall elimination applies to you, the member, if you earn your own eligibility for Social Security. You know, on your statement, and also a lot of times online when you're looking at your benefit, they might show you a benefit if you retired age 62, or if you wait to full retirement, or if you wait to age 70, what your benefit would be. Well, oftentimes that benefit has not calculated in the windfall elimination. That benefit they're showing you was presuming that you would stay more fully engaged in a Social Security earnings employment for most of your life, which again, you haven't. You have been contributing to a non-Social Security. So they're going to make this adjustment. And long story short, the good news is if you would have happened to have 30, and we're talking about substantial earning years again, 30 years or more in Social Security, and we have clients that have done that, then there's no reduction. If you've had between 20 equivalent years and 30, there's kind of a sliding index as to how much withholding or elimination reduction you would have. If you have 20 equivalent years or less, you're going to have what's called the maximum Social Security elimination offset. And to give you an example, I think last year it was in the area of $410 a month or so. So that's kind of an easy way to look at it. I think the online Social Security website helps you factor that in based on your history. Again, it's something that in our no-cost consultations, we can help people get set up and look at that, if that would be helpful. The government offset would apply to you, the member, if you would happen to earn a benefit off of a spouse that maybe was more fully engaged with Social Security. And so the way the law reads, particularly for non-employed spouses, they can earn off and get a benefit off their spouse's benefit. But again, because you as the member have been more fully engaged in a non-Social Security, then likely they're going to have an offset because of that for any benefit you might get off a spouse. And for many people, it's kind of factored into your benefit off of your pension plan. And there's a formula. They're going to look at 2/3 of what's paid to you from your pension benefit and offset that against any benefit you might get off of a spouse. And oftentimes it wipes that out or greatly reduces it. But you want to know about that and predict that into your long-range planning. Now, we're not going to talk too much, although it's hugely important, which is healthcare. That's a very, very much of a changing landscape with the state pensions. They've made it abundantly clear, and I know I don't have to probably remind you, that it is not a guaranteed benefit, unlike the pension plan payments, traditional plans themselves. So it is a moving target. They've made changes. We predict they're going to make more changes. State teachers is continuing to provide a benefit for those retired, even if they're turning age 65. They have some choices of Medicare, and they'll help you get set up with that. And then, of course, PERS. With STRS, I think you need 15 years, if I recall. They're looking at changing that in 2023, I think, to needing 20 years. PERS right now requires the 20 years of service to qualify for a benefit, particularly if you're leaving before age 65. If you're 65 and retired, PERS really is going to help you get set up with community plans. And again, chances are all of you will kind of get involved with Medicare eventually. There again, we have, COPEC has special Medicare programs. Look for us on the on-campus or go into the COPEC website and sign up for these special programs to really get in depth. We know we have 4 parts of Medicare now, A, B, and D. A is hospital, B, kind of everything else, outpatient, surgeries. Part D is your prescription drug. Or you can go into what we call the Advantage programs. And so those are the 2 broad choices. And you should get exposure to both before making that decision. And particularly this can affect a non-spouse member, particularly based on when your retirement age is. Are they better off going with community plans since maybe they don't get subsidy, or if the subsidy's leaving? So with that in mind, I thank you for your patience, and we'll hopefully come back on if you have some questions, or again, invite you to write down those in the survey or sign up for a consultation. We'd be happy to meet with you. So with no further ado, Nate's going to pick up and talk about a process that we hope can help you.
Great. Well, thank you, Jerry. I'm waiting. Looks like I'm trying to start. Oh, there we go. I think you may have blocked my video, I believe, but we'll get started here if you're able to unblock that. A lot of good information. We appreciate everybody's time today. Perfect. All right. But yeah, so a lot of good information, really focused on STRS and OPERS. Now for the financial planning, we're going to look at really, putting it all together now. How come, how OPERS and STRS or, the ARP is just usually one part of the entire picture. So what do we need to look at and think about to make sure that we reach the ultimate goal of financial independence? And really, financial independence is just having enough money to do what you want, really, or enough resources to do what you want. So a lot of times you still continue working, and other times you may not, but we want to retire. But in general, it's just the ability to do it. So if you do decide to continue going to work, you're doing it because you want to be there. So, it's really, when it comes to financial independence and analysis and the financial planning, as we call it as well, it's really important to continue to monitor it. So you could put a plan together today, but life changes along the way. And, there are a lot of variables that go into it. We'll talk about it here, that there's no way to necessarily know what the exact correct answer is. So we want to make sure that, each year, let's make sure we're still on track to be where we want to be.
Hey, Nate,
Yes,
just want to clarify, your screen is not up.
not at all?
Not at all. It was up and it went away.
Okay. How's that? Does everybody see it now?
There we go.
We're good. Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So really, when can I retire financially independent? Do I have enough to live the way I want to live throughout my lifetime? If I decide to stay, what will I gain or lose by staying at my employment? Or do I need to work part-time if I do want to move on from this position? Those are the types of things that the financial planning we try to answer here. There are a lot of variables that go into it that we don't maybe not necessarily know all the answers to. So you'll see a list of them here. A lot of things I'll say. Number one, there are a lot of tools online that you can use to run these numbers. If you're doing it on your own that way, make sure you really, really understand the assumptions that those are using. What are the rate of returns? What is the life expectancy they're using? The rate of inflation, things like that. Are they assuming that you're getting a raise on your pension, where some pensions you do, some pensions you don't? So you want to make sure that you understand all the variables, so that your results are good, or at least reasonable. When we do planning, we really like to use conservative numbers. Things don't always work out the way we want to. So we like to leave a little bit of wiggle room or a little bit of a buffer to make sure that when those things happen, it's not going to derail the entire plan that you had set. Especially, particularly when we're talking about inheritances. Hey, if you do get one, it's great. And if you know for certain you're going to get a certain amount, okay, let's go ahead and kind of plan for that a little bit. But what if the person you're planning on inheriting the money from has a long-term care situation that ends up, eroding that money? So I'm always careful to, assume that there is going to be a large inheritance. We want to make sure with the Social Security, are we factoring in, if you're doing it on a tool online and the windfall elimination provision is going to affect you, or the government offset, are those accounted for in the projections that they're making? So really the first step is getting all the information together. And a lot of times that takes, a little while to make sure we've got all that information together. But in the end, you're going to get some type of graph that looks like this. And later on, we'll show some slides that have actually the planning software we use at our firm. But in general, this is the picture we're going to see in some capacity. In this first one here, what you'll see, there are really 5 important time frames when we're looking at the planning. The first vertical line on the left is where you stand today. What do you have right now? And then the green curve going up, that's your savings period between now and retirement, the time you're putting money away and saving into the 403B or 457 or the ARP or the pension plan. You're saving between now and then. And that's something that savings rate can be something that's changed. And then the red vertical line here is the retirement date. So that's, again, something that can be changed. You could slide it to the left if you're going to retire sooner, or slide it to the right if you're going to delay retirement. And then the red arc that's going down, that's your distribution period. So from retirement until the date of death, we are pulling money out of our accounts. And then finally the date of death, which we don't know. So we always, try to err on the side of caution, again, in our conservative lean when the planning, always make sure that you have enough. It's not okay to run out of money, but it's okay to have money left over, basically, is how we look at it with the planning. So you'll see a graph similar to that. If everything works, I'll go back to that in a moment. This is if everything works out perfect. You bounce the last check you write. Here's something where we're saying, okay, what if we might be falling short? If we don't have enough assets to make it till the end. Now, when we make these projections, these are assets in accounts is what this chart is showing. So if it ever hits 0, you would still have your pension coming in or any Social Security coming in, if those are things that are guaranteed income coming in. We also don't like to use housing in a plan. So if you have if you own your home, and it ever hits 0 here, you would have your incomes coming in and your home to live in. You just don't have other accounts to pull from to meet other needs. So this is something we really want to avoid seeing, or it's okay if we see that in the beginning and it gives us an idea of what we need to do to correct that, basically. And if this is what we see, what can we do to correct it? You know, there are different options you can have. And that's what I really like in the planning software we'll show you later. Well, we can do quick, you know, what if we did this differently? What if we did that differently? But different options, if you are, you know, you can see a shortfall coming, you can live on less in retirement, you know, a lower standard of living, or, you know, even cutting back that now to start getting used to it before retirement. You can save more along the way. So, you know, in that green arc that was going up before the savings period, well, what if I put a little bit more away? And usually if you're adding more to savings, you're somewhat cutting expenses in order to be able to do that. So it's, you know, kind of a double benefit on that. You can earn more, whether it's, you know, going and getting a raise right now, whether it's portfolio earnings in retirement, or whether it's working part-time during retirement. Just have more money coming in that's not from your portfolio as well, but portfolio can be a source of it. And finally, delay retirement. So sometimes people say, look, I'd rather work 1 year at my current position than leave this position and work 3 years somewhere else, whether it's part-time or just a lower paying position. And other people are the opposite. They say, look, get me out of this place as soon as can possibly be, but I'm willing to go work another job, even if it means me working more years. Maybe it's less stress, less hours, things like that. So, but the main takeaway here is there are many different options that you can fix or change if there is a shortfall. Here's a chart we like to see, and this is when there's excess assets. And this really leaves, again, going back to that, just kind of a buffer, a little wiggle room for things that do go wrong. But a lot of times we see it's a point where that green line actually on the far right continues to go up, even where you're not spending anywhere near what the growth in the accounts are. At that point, it's kind of fun, you know, start dreaming a little bit more. Do you want to maybe treat the whole family to a vacation, rent a big house down on the beach in Florida? Do you want to, maybe instead of keeping your money until you pass away and then giving it to your heirs, maybe I want to start giving some away now to enjoy watching them enjoy some of the assets. Maybe you want to pay for grandchildren's college, things like that. Or you know, you have enough for if a long-term care situation were to happen, things along those lines. It really leaves a lot of flexibility in the plan when we have the excess assets, and it gives you a little more chance to dream on what you really want to do. And we're going to go through 8 important pieces that come into the financial planning. But the first one, I think, is one that people don't spend enough time on, and that's goals. You know, as you transition into retirement, what are you going to do with your time? A lot of times it's travel. That's one of the really common ones we see. It's, hey, we only spend X amount of dollars a year traveling now, but down the road, you know, when we retire, we've got this extra time. We really want to travel a lot, maybe for the first 10 years, knowing that, hey, as we get a little older, we're probably not going to have the ability to do it as much. So then we'll cut back at that point. But, everybody's hopes and dreams are different. And a lot of times we have to kind of coax clients. Well, what about, they just kind of name their basic expenses and don't really think about what they really want. So, we always want to test, we'll talk about needs, wants, wishes in a little bit. We'll test for these different things, but really think about what you want as far as those goals. We definitely want to track those expenses and taxes. We want to look at the income. Where is it coming from? Pension accounts, things like that. How are we saving and accumulating that money, and how is it going to grow with that allocation? We'll talk about distribution planning as well as managing risk. I'm not going to really go deep on the planning your estate today. I'll talk briefly on it, but there's an attorney through COPEC that does presentations on these. He does, Russ Golloway. He does a phenomenal job. If you're interested in that planning the estate, definitely check out the COPEC website to see one of his seminars. So this is now we're shifting as we go through these important planning pieces. We're going to shift into, you'll see, pictures of the software we use. Then the software we use is called eMoney. Again, there are multiple tools out there to do these projections, but eMoney is actually one of the biggest ones used by advisors. So some of these, screenshots you'll see here are from that eMoney system. If you're not able to see the numbers in particular, it's not too bad on, these Zoom meetings, but don't worry about the actual numbers. Those are less important than the concepts. The concepts are really what's important as far as why we're doing this, what we can learn out of the planning and things like that. But in this example, it's made up numbers for a sample client named STRS and OPERS. STRS is on the pension plan, the defined benefit, and OPERS is in the member directed plan. So that, which is the defined contribution plan. So those are just so we can kind of illustrate the different ways this system looks at things. But as you see the goals, we want to talk about that. What are things that maybe you're not thinking about now that are going to happen in the future? So in the example of the travel here, it's, hey, we're going to travel extra until age 85, but then we're going to need to pull it back a little bit. Different things are going to have different, different goals, and expenses are going to have different inflation rates and different time periods. We really want to break these out and be as specific as we can. But the autos here are an example. Hey, one of these clients, the couple here just wants to lease at $350 a month, where the other one likes to buy their cars outright at $25,000 a car, let's say. But so they continued on. We want to talk about healthcare, because that's, it's going to be different when you're working to when you retire and potentially go on Medicare. Well, what if you're not Medicare eligible? You may have a gap where you really need to plan for those healthcare expenses that can be $25,000 a couple potentially if you're going and buying it off the exchange or direct from the marketplace. So these are things we want to make sure there's a discussion on and a distinct plan for how we're going to handle these, and that we have enough to fund it. The final one here, leave to heirs. That's something that the software actually automatically fills in. We get a big kick out, when we're talking with clients and when we leave that number as 0. But in reality, 99+% of our clients, we use that number as 0. Now we're going to say, look, whatever's left at the end is going to go to your beneficiaries. But what we want to make sure is that you're taken care of. Now, on the flip side, if you say, look, I consider my plan a failure if I don't leave X amount of dollars to a charity or my children, whatever it may be, we can put that, specific number in there. But what our main focus is, are you going to have enough until, enough money to last until you pass away? So that's really where we focus on the planning. And then what decisions can we make to optimize things along the way? So one of the hardest aspects of planning here are tracking expenses even, as accurately as we can. A lot of things are going to pop up here and there, home repairs maybe that aren't as smooth. It's, hey, I pay the cable bill every month and it's X amount of dollars. Pretty simple. But hey, I need to plan for a roof in 10 years and a hot water tank in 5 and a furnace in 15, whatever it may be. These things are more, lumpy, large things that kind of pop in. And so there are different ways we can illustrate it. But the main thing is we want to make sure they're accounted for. We really like to look at those needs, wants, and wishes. Look, we need to make sure your needs are met, roof over your head and food on the table, things like that. But then if those are all met, if those aren't met, I'd say, look, you really need to make adjustments to the plan or keep working longer if the absolute necessities aren't met. Then once we make sure those are, we want to look into the wants. Hey, I want to travel $10,000 a year at retirement and buy a $25,000 car, whatever the numbers may be. Then if those are met, we also like to look in the wishes. Hey, I'd love to pay for my grandchildren's education, or I'd love to buy a second home down in Florida or Arizona, whatever it may be. We kind of do the progression, make sure one's met, let's move to the next. If that one is, let's move to the next. So we want to kind of nail those down, those needs, wants, and wishes. We really want to look at, expenses now and how they'll change in the future. Some things are going to, hey, if you're at OSU and going in, that's going to drop off your parking. That's fantastic. You're not going to be contributing to OPERS or STRS or the ARP anymore. So those are expenses that are going to go away. Maybe your mortgage gets paid off. Other things are going to be higher. And that's usually typically healthcare. And it's usually entertainment expenses. You have more time. Every day is a Saturday now. So you've got a lot more time on your hands to do what you want to do. So you kind of keep an eye on what you think those expenses are going to be in your different life stages. We want to look at fixed and variable expenses. Those fixed are the ones that you have to pay, where variable are the ones that can change. So if the plan isn't looking as well as we want it to look, but most of our expenses are fund variable things that we could cut back on if things aren't doing well in the markets and in investments and things like that. Hey, it's not as vital as, hey, look, if all our fixed expenses are barely met and we have almost no variable and something goes wrong, there's not really much that you can cut back on. So we want to identify those and separate those out. Inflation and taxes are really big. We want to make sure those are accounted for, and we'll talk about that a lot here. And then we get the question often, should I pay off my mortgage? And it's in the software, it's really fun to kind of show the comparison. But it really comes down to, there are numbers we can say, and it all comes down to the assumptions you use as well. But hey, I may mathematically be able to say, it looks like you're better off just hanging on to the mortgage. Rates are really low. And if you were to take, the only place you can get the money from maybe in this situation would be a retirement account where you'd have to pay taxes on it to take it out. Maybe mathematically it doesn't look that good. But if you can't sleep at night and the plan shows that you can pay it off, then let's go ahead and do it. On the flip side, hey, if I've got more than enough sitting in cash, I'm going to have enough cash flow from my pension to meet all my needs anyway. And I don't want to deal with making that payment every month. And I'll feel so much better retiring if I don't have a mortgage. If the plan says it's okay, let's go ahead and pay it off. So, it's something that we can run different what ifs and look at. We always want to account for unanticipated needs. Things are going to pop up. That's why it's important to monitor the plan throughout, but we want to make sure we're keeping track of those things so that, when they do come up, we're able to handle them. So I always like to, when I run plans, hey, things look good. Well, what if we added X amount more per year or every 3 years or whatever it may be? That way, when those things come up, we know, look, we already took care of that. Everything looks good to do that. As an example, we had one client, we talked about travel. No, my wife hates planes more than anything, and I'm not driving all around the country. Don't build in any travel. So again, I knew there was a little bit of a buffer in the plan. Well, I was talking to him a year later, and he was telling me about fishing on the Columbia River. And I said, that's out west, isn't it? Yeah, well, my son had a child, so now we need to go visit these grandchildren out there twice a year. And because we're not flying, we need to take a train, which costs twice as much as a plane would cost. So, these things that you may not be thinking of the day you retire, we want to make sure we have flexibility going forward. Things like the roof and furnace, I think for me, those are not unanticipated. If you own a home, we need to anticipate that. So we're going to build an expense for that when we do the planning with our clients. And again, larger planned purchases, a lot of times when we're asking clients for expenses, they have no problem coming up with a spreadsheet of their expenses. But if it's the middle of summer, they may not be thinking about holiday gifts or birthday gifts. They may not be thinking about, ski trips that they go on, whatever it may be in the winter, and vice versa. Things in the winter you may not be thinking about summer. So it's really something to track these expenses. You might want to look over a multi-year period. Sometimes it takes that to really get a good feel for it. But if you're listing your expenses now and you don't have a car payment, you're not going to have that on there. But we need to make sure that we're accounting for your future car purchases. So how do we track expenses? For some people, that's a real struggle. Really, I always say whatever works best for you. For some, a paper and pen. Hey, that's just the best way for me is just to write everything down as I spend it and track it each month. For others, it may be an Excel spreadsheet. I really like account aggregation sites like mint.com is one, or this our planning software, the eMoney software has a client side of it that has the account aggregation. So, for example, my bank offers something that tracks my expenses and you can categorize them. And so does my credit card, but I'm using different expenses in different ones. If you use one of these account aggregation sites, you can see everything in one place and it can track it for you. And you can't lie about your spending because it's showing what's actually being spent. So, an account aggregation site is a really good way to track those expenses over time. Again, the big thing on expenses, let's make sure everything's accounted for and it's coming in the correct time frame. So this is just kind of what the software shows for expenses. And then actually the software figures in taxes here, which you'll see as we move through here. But again, we want to just make sure those minimum expenses are met. Depending on what your taxes are, it can be different. If you're in a state that has high state income taxes, that also taxes pensions and Social Security, maybe it's going to look a lot different than if you're in a state that doesn't tax Social Security or pensions at all, or has no state income tax at all. So figuring in the taxes when you're making these projections is very important. Now we want to look at income. What do we have coming in automatically? That's your pensions, your salary, potential Social Security here. Now, when we run the income projections, again, we want to be conservative. We don't want to assume we're going to get a 10% raise every year as we're nearing retirement. We don't want to assume, STRS, I use a 0% inflation rate when we do the planning. We were just watching a webinar with one of the directors of benefits at STRS, and a financial advisor asked, what assumptions should we be making for this? And he said the most conservative would be 0, but that's probably unrealistic to assume through your lifetime it's 0. But again, we like to be conservative, make sure we're not counting on increases in those pensions if we may not get them. I do the same thing for, let's say, like the subsidy for the OPERS healthcare. Hey, let's not necessarily count on that. Let's look at it with it, but then let's also look at what if they cut that in a certain year and we don't get any? They just made a reduction, but they're continuing it starting next year, the reduction. But, like, what happens if it does go away? Will I still be okay? And then, we want to look at the accounts we have. What savings do we have? What's the kind of tax wrapper that these different accounts are in? How are they going to be handled as far as taxes go? How are they invested? So we know the allocation of it. So this, this shows us where we stand right now. Then we want to look at what are we going to put away between now and retirement, the savings rate. And that's something that can be adjusted if need be in there, but we want to account for the fact that these accounts are going to grow because of the money that you and or your employer are adding to these accounts. And then, how are they going to grow? Different asset classes have different risk factors and different return factors. So when you're building a portfolio, you want some things that kind of zig while the others zag. It's called, negative correlation, or, if one thing's going up, another thing may be going down, but that's okay, because in another time frame where that other one that was going up is now going down, the one that was going down is now going up, and it evens out your account. Instead of wild swings, it kind of narrows it down a little bit a lot of times. So we want to have different asset classes that are going to behave differently. But when we do that, it's going to change the aspect of the growth rate. So the software we use and most plans use are going to build in a growth rate. This particular software looks at how the accounts are invested and how it breaks it down into the different asset classes in there in the actual account that are making up the portfolio. And then it looks historically how those types of investments have returned. In this example, it's about a 6.5%, almost 7% rate of return assumed with the current portfolio. Now, they can answer, on the software, a questionnaire that gives you a risk tolerance. Well, in this example, the risk tolerance is about, a moderately aggressive. We say, hey, look, the holy grail of investing is if you can get the same, get a better return with the same risk, or get the same return while taking less risk. So that, that's where we kind of dig into the portfolios and see are there changes that can be made in the portfolio where we can kind of maximize that risk return. And then we look at how does it look in the plan, in the long-term picture. There are times where we recommend that, hey, the plan looks better if you get a little bit more aggressive with the investments. Now, you need to be comfortable with getting a little bit more aggressive, and sometimes that plan will help. Look, here's the comparisons. But sometimes it looks better by taking more risk and getting a higher return, where other times it's actually improves the likelihood that the plan will work if we say, hey, let's pull back on the investment, take less risk. You don't need as much return, and the risk is hurting you too much with how aggressive you are. So we look at the different types of portfolios out there and what's best for your particular plan. Once we get all that information in, it really comes into a spreadsheet here. And I love spreadsheets. For those of you who don't worry, find somebody who does that can help you out with it. But really, it's just everything comes into a spreadsheet here, basically. So it's going to show you year by year. Now, this screenshots were from a little while back, but it's going to show year by year how that income's coming in and how the outflows are going out based on the way we want to live. And so for this particular example, the very top line in 2019, they're both working. Both the spouses are working. If you look down into 2022, now both spouses are retired. So that's where the drop of the guaranteed income, because it's no longer a salary. One of them has a pension, and the other one was in that member direct, and they're just going to take from their accounts as need be. So if we know we're going to see this drop in income, we know we're going to need to basically pull from accounts in a couple of years. How can we prepare for that and get ready? Then the total expenses here, you'll see 144,000 of expenses going out. That's right around the middle of the screen. So if 159 is coming in from the two salaries and 144 is going out for expenses, well, in this example, they're also saving $15,700 into retirement plans at work that we've identified here in the plan. Okay, we need to go pull $1,000 out of accounts. Is that net cash flow is a negative number here? It means you need to pull out. If it's a positive number, it means you should have some money left over extra. You have more coming in than going out. So you should be able to save it or spend it depending on how the plan looks, how you want to handle that. But in this example, okay, while we're working, we only need to pull $1,000 from our checking account, more than is going into it this year. Then on the far right, we've got total portfolio assets. So that just looks at all the accounts lumped into one total. What's that grand total in the accounts? And we can just see it going year by year. In this example, in this plan, we're going out to ages 90 for each of the clients, making sure that's enough to get them out to age 90. And going out to age 90, there's about $500,000 left in the accounts. Now, a couple of important things here. That's assuming everything along the way fits the plan, number one. And number two, it's assuming an average rate of return every single year, which we know we don't get. So we also want to account for that. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But what you'll see here, because we are using conservative numbers, we're using a 3.25% rate of inflation, which is a little bit above the current inflation rate. But we're also assuming no growth on that STRS pension. We're assuming only 1% growth on Social Security. And if you have a private employer pension, there's usually no growth at all. So usually, eventually, what you'll see here is at some point, inflation, if it's higher than the income going up, is going to start kind of eating away at those assets. So here in the example, at ages about 77 and 78, you'll see the actual total portfolio start to slightly creep down a little bit. And then this is just kind of breaking down those columns. We talked about that first column before was income. Well, now this is showing, we want to look at year by year where that income is coming from. So we can look for maybe gaps. Maybe there are certain years where there is no income coming in. We're going to have to take everything from accounts. Or maybe we want to start Social Security a little bit sooner. So there is some income coming in without going into accounts. So this is where we can kind of, we want to see the projections of where it's coming in. And then the same with expenses. When are these expenses going to be hitting or falling off? So in this example, the column says liability payments. That's the mortgage being paid off in 2025. Fantastic. So we're going to have almost $15,000 annual expense that's going to fall off. Now, keep in mind, property taxes and insurance, we build that out separate from the mortgage because that's still going to continue throughout the plan if you own the home. So really the main thing here just shows, okay, here's what's going out when the time frames for it. One of the really important things I look at here are the second from last column here, the taxes paid. This is where it really presents opportunities. There are jumps in the marginal tax brackets, from 12% to, if you earn just a little bit outside of that 12% bracket, the next jump is 22. So every dollar above that 12% limit, every dollar above that is taxed at 22%. It's not a penalty, it's just a different tax rate. But for me, I think of it almost like a 10% penalty because you're paying 10% more tax. The next jump is from 22 to 24, which is not as big of a jump. It's not as big of a deal. But then the jump after that is from 24% to 32%. So by you looking at those tax brackets and trying to make the income fit within those lower brackets and avoiding that jump into the next one, it can have quite an impact. Well, here you see as they're working, it's about $33,000 in taxes. Then if you use the most tax efficient means of taking money out is what the system defaults to. So if you use the most tax efficient means of taking money out, those taxes are going to drop all the way to $4,000. in the early years of retirement, but then it's going to jump back up once the IRS tells us we have to pull a certain amount out of those retirement accounts, and now we're taking out a taxable. So looking at these big kind of jumps or drops in different categories are really, they present opportunities to create plans or make adjustments that are going to improve the plan over time. So this is basically the software's chart that compares to those earlier charts we looked at that looked at, as we work and grow, and then as we start pulling out. And this is what that is in the software. So you're looking out to age 90, about $500,000, just over $500,000 left at the end of the account or at the end of the plan. Remember, if it ever hits zero, we still have the pension coming in our home to live in. We just don't have accounts. But hey, $500,000 is a pretty good number in most eyes. So, now we need to account for inflation. So, using that 3.25% rate of inflation, $500,000 out at age 90, 25 years or so from now is not going to buy the same thing that $500,000 buys now. So I like to picture things in today's dollars. So that $500,000 in 25 years is only going to buy about little over $200,000 in today's purchasing power. So that's kind of the way I like to look at it, is with today's purchasing power. But still, things look good. Then this system we like to run, all different softwares do it as well. We like to run what's called in this situation, it's a Monte Carlo. It's what's the likelihood that money will be left over, because that last chart, this chart we're looking at right now, that assumes that you get an average rate of return every single year, which we know doesn't happen. So then it runs 1,000 different random market trials, and different systems use different number of trials. And it says, what's the likelihood of success? Now, success is defined in this by having at least $1 left over at the end of the plan at age 90. So again, in that perfect scenario where you're bouncing your last check, if you had $1. But so in this situation, even though things looked good with an average rate of return, once that market volatility kicks in, it says, well, hey, look, there are some things we definitely want to keep an eye on things, because 37% of the time you would have ran out of money if you didn't adjust. Now, keep in mind, in real life, most people make adjustments when things happen. When COVID hit and accounts dropped, the IRS said you don't have to take required distributions, and you can't travel. So, and you can't go out to eat as much. So expenses are going down a lot. So what you really see is adjustments that people make. But this is saying, without making adjustments, 37% of the time you would run out of money if the markets didn't work with you. Then to the right, you'll see the two green lines and the red line here. That's showing what's the kind of range of outcomes we can look at. So, hey, if everything works out great and the markets work well for you, $4 million left over. If everything works against you and the markets just drop at the wrong times when you really need to pull a lot out of the accounts, for example, you could end up negative $585,000. Now, I don't think most people are going to end up with $4 million in this situation, and I don't think most people are going to end up negative. It's probably going to be somewhere closer to that median range, because, hey, look, if things are going wrong, you're going to adapt. And on the flip side, if things are going that right, you're usually going to adapt. You're going to travel more, gift more, whatever it may be. You end up not saving or getting as much gains as the best case scenario presents typically. But that's really, that's how everything's put together in the software. Then what's really fun with the software are the different projections of what if we did this differently, and how quickly it can run all these different calculations. So in this example, let's say, hey, look, I'm not comfortable with a 63%, the clients might say. So what can we do to improve that 63%? This first thing I look at, where you see early on in it, there's a little bit of gray in those blue lines at the top. That means there's actually less in accounts. And then at the end, there's green, which means more, given this change that I'm making in it. So in this example, we said the change is, hey, those early years with that really low taxation in retirement, let's go ahead and force some distributions out of retirement accounts to, let's work to fill up those lower tax brackets so that later on, we're not having to take out as much out taxable. As you see, creating that tax early kind of hurts you early on, but there is a break even in this example, and it actually looks better, about a $75,000 increase at the end of the plan. which is great, except it doesn't fix the plan necessarily. It's an improvement, but the Monte Carlo, that likelihood of success, is exactly the same in this scenario. So how can we improve that Monte Carlo? Well, another thing we can do, what if we, let's keep that, let's go ahead and not make that change, that forced distribution. What if we just cut expenses by $5,000 a year? If all we did in this plan was cut expenses by $5,000 throughout the plan, it brings that likelihood of success up to 75%, a 12% improvement, which is great. Well, what if I don't want to cut my expenses? What if instead we go look at that more aggressive portfolio? Well, if we don't cut expenses at all, but we do make that portfolio adjustment, it brings that Monte Carlo right up to about the same as if we cut expenses. So again, this comes down to your individual wants and wishes. You know, some people say, look, I'd rather cut expenses because I'm not comfortable with changing my investment allocation. Others say, look, I'm not cutting expenses, but I'll be happy to change my investment allocation. And the same can go with it working a little bit more. So in this next example, we said, well, okay, what if we do work a little bit part-time and we cut the expenses and we do those forced distributions from the accounts that I mentioned, and let's go ahead and make the adjustments to the investments, 92%. So with just some minor adjustments, we go from a 63% likelihood of money lasting throughout our lifetimes to a 92%. Again, every plan is going to be a little bit different. Everybody's willingness to change different variables is going to be a little bit different. And that's why it's really, you know, it's great to build a custom plan instead of just kind of plugging numbers in on an Excel sheet and saying, hey, I'm okay to go. You know, so it's really important, again, to run the different, what can happen in different market scenarios as well. The next thing is, what if we just make some adjustments and add those excess assets? Let's say the clients here had more in accounts built up. Well, this shows us on this net cash flow, the second from right column, almost throughout the entire plan, there's a positive cash flow. The only negative years are right off the bat, early on in retirement. And then once the IRS says you have to pull a certain amount from accounts, well, we shift to having more money than we need, let's say. Other than when there's car purchases all at once. But so what can we do here? Maybe the PLOP is a good idea because we don't need as much guaranteed income. We can tuck it away in a tax deferred account. And if something happens to me, it would go to my heirs. But again, it's really, everybody's situation is a little bit different, but you want to look at what's the cash flow going to look like in 15 or 20 years. And also when you have those excess assets, you can say, okay, well, what if I spent a little bit more each year? Or what if I spent big years, you know, for big vacations, whatever it may be? You could say, what does that look like in the plan? And it runs very quick comparison. We want to look at distribution decisions. So where are we going to get that money from when we need it? As Jerry talked about the pension maximization before, maybe doing less survivorship and buying a life insurance policy versus adding more survivorship on. Maybe we want to do that lump sum to get more into accounts under my own control and lowering that monthly amount that's coming in guaranteed taxable every year. But keep in mind, you know, if you're retiring before 59 and a half, where are you going to be able to pull money from to make sure you have a place that you can go to pull those assets from. And then at 72, keep in mind, you're going to get that big bump up potentially if you have a lot of retirement accounts in what the IRS forces you to take out. Sometimes keep in mind, if you haven't heard of IRMA, I-R-M-A-A, it's a Medicare surcharge. Sometimes when those distributions kick in, all of a sudden now your Medicare goes up because of that IRMA surcharge. Is there a way we can plan around that by taking out money earlier? But when you look at the software and, you know, when you're doing your plans, you make sure you do kind of what ifs for managing risks. What if one of you passes away too soon? Do you have enough insurance or survivorship on your pension for the other spouse to be okay? What if you live too long? I heard a webinar recently that said, hey, a married couple age 65 that has retirement accounts has a 50% chance one of them is going to live to 92 and a 25% chance that one of them is going to live to age 95. So, you know, some situations living too long is detrimental to a plan. So we want to make sure that money is going to last if you live longer. You know, those investments, if you invest too aggressively, bad things can happen in bad years where the spread of outcomes when the system runs 1,000 different trials becomes really big. A lot of times, if you just be a little bit more conservative, it narrows down the range of outcomes. On the flip side, hey, most people can't just go to cash when they retire and not have to worry about what the market does, because you're too conservative. You're not getting enough to at least keep up with inflation from those accounts. So we want to find the right balance of risk and return. What do we need that we're comfortable with? Basically, we're comfortable with the allocation. And finally, we want to make sure we're accounting for healthcare. Build in a kind of, what if a long-term care happened? Well, how are we going to handle it? Let's plan ahead. Are we going to plan for Medicaid? Are we going to buy insurance? Or do we just have enough assets to cover a long-term care situation? So those are things you want to make sure you have set and planned ahead. As Jerry mentioned earlier, this is no substitute to talking to your actual providers, the sources, the STRSs and OPERs of Ohio. They have great representatives who will help you out, but get you the right numbers and understanding of how the plans work. So make sure you're reaching out to them. Contact any previous employers. Make sure you've got everything accounted for that you have. And it's a lot of data gathering. So start getting the pieces together in one spot so you kind of know. So when it is time to really get into this planning, that you know where to find everything. Make sure you plan for your estate, get those beneficiaries lined up right so that things happen the way you want to. Make sure you have the proper documentation in order so that your loved ones, it's a smooth process for them if something were to happen to you as well. So we'll be here to answer questions. If anybody has questions, then feel free to reach out privately if it's something you don't want to ask in front of the group as well. But thank you all for your time today.
Nate, thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope this met your expectations. I think when you close out, you'll have that little survey. It really doesn't take long at all. We really appreciate it. And again, let us know if we can be of any assistance in the future. Take care and thanks again.
Thank you.